How much copper do you actually need on the farm? How important is this particular nutrient? We've had farmers for years test for N, P, and K and talk all about N, P, and K. But Darren, you know what? On some of our ground, copper is probably the yield limiting factor.
Well, when you think about the micronutrients too, you talk about the soil sampling, Brian, and we see soil samples where they only test for zinc or they only test for boron. And it's like, wait a minute, what about copper, guys? And we see it playing out in 2017 in a number of ways. One way that we'll see it in soybeans is in seed coat stretch, seed coat resiliency. So sometimes you have great big seed and there's kind of a split on that seed coat because the seed got bigger than the seed coat could handle. One of the factors in that, one of the nutrients that plays a role there is copper. Another spot that we've seen a lot this year has been in standability as well. Copper is one of those nutrients, along with potassium and others, that play into the strength of your stalk and the lignin building component in that stalk. Well, if you don't have a good, strong stalk, you can't keep your plant standing until harvest. So there's just a couple real obvious examples of where copper is going to come into play.
The thing I think about first when it comes to copper is just overall disease control. How tolerant is your plant to diseases? The more tolerant it is, the more healthy it is. Well, we're in a lot better shape when those diseases, and they always do seem to come in, when they arrive, we just want to make sure that we've done everything possible to make the crop as resilient as we can when that disease shows up. So how does copper play a role into that? Well, a couple of different things. Number one is just overall tolerance to the disease. Now, the other side of it is there have been farmers for years who have used copper as a foliar feed, and copper sometimes has a little bit of activity on diseases when they get started on leaves. So there are two different ways that copper can affect overall disease control in a plant.
Well, and you mentioned that, Brian, like bacterial diseases, for example, we see a lot of copper sulfate type solutions. Not that they're completely predictable or always work, but it's certainly something that guys will try. And with copper, there's just a number of things to think about in terms of what it does within the plant. But the question is, well, how much copper do I actually need? Because you look at fertilizer removal charts, we aren't really removing that much copper each season.
No, we're not, but that is where you need to start. What we always suggest is, hey, begin with getting a good soil test. And let's take a look at what crop am I going to raise, what's my yield goal, and how much of each individual nutrient do I really need? So a lot of times when we get the soil test results back, we'll see levels for sufficiency with copper in the soil of somewhere in the 2 parts per million, 3 parts per million. It's not very much, it's just a few pounds per acre that we've got out there. If you're below those levels, then quite often the lab is going to tell you, hey, you better put some copper on. If you're above those levels, the lab will say, no, you're probably in pretty good shape. Well, you might be in pretty good shape, but how about when you're going for really high yield levels of certain crops? Or how about if you've been having issues with your seed coat resiliency or standability or possibly just disease tolerance overall? Maybe you need a little bit more. So what we do encourage you to do is take a look at plant tissue analysis as well and track plant tissue analysis all the way through the growing season with any crop that you raise. Then you have an idea, hey, yeah, I might have had whatever, low level, high level in the soil. I don't really care about that at the end of the day. I just care about, am I getting the copper at good enough levels into that plant during the growing season?
Now, when it comes to building up those copper levels, the great thing about it is if you do build up to a good level of copper, you're probably going to be fine, maybe even for 10 or 20 years, depending on where you're at and what crops you're raising, what kind of yields you're at. And this is one of those things where we talk to farmers all the time. I've never fertilized for copper. I don't know what you're talking about, but you know what? Maybe your dad did. You know what? Maybe you used to apply manure and you got plenty of copper out there in the manure. You have to look at all the sources of everything you're putting out on your fields to kind of see where you're at with nutrient levels, especially with some of these micros. We see a lot of guys putting on water treatment plant lime and find, wow, there's about 10 different nutrients in there besides the calcium that I was really looking for. And this may be the case with some of the things that you're applying to your field.
Once again, we just encourage you, do a good job with soil testing and your overall soil testing program. make sure you're testing for micronutrients, including copper. Take a look at what you have for levels, not only in the field in general, but in each area of the field. If you've got some bad areas, some really low areas, yes, you can certainly go out there and do some broadcast. You can also do a little 2x2 work. You got to be a little careful about how much you're going to throw in furrow. Copper can cause some problems with seed germination. So again, just be real careful about that, but definitely 2x2, broadcast, and even foliar feeding are real common ways of getting copper into your plant.
Well, building copper levels in your soil may be important for you, but it won't stop our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?